For nearly a century, the Gulf Cartel has ruled the drug trade with an iron fist, an empire built on blood, corruption, and billions of dollars. From humble beginnings as a bootlegging operation to a feared cartel controlling entire regions of Mexico, their influence runs deep. They smuggled cocaine, heroin, and marijuana into the United States while waging brutal wars against rivals, leaving cities in terror. But what made them so powerful? How did they create one of the deadliest paramilitary forces in cartel history, the infamous Los Zetas? Today, we dive into the untold story of the Gulf Cartel, its rise, betrayals, deadly wars, and its shocking collapse. Chapter 1: Origins, the birth of the Gulf Cartel. The Gulf Cartel, one of the most ruthless criminal organizations in history, was not born in blood, but in business. Before it became a multi-billion-dollar drug empire, it started as a simple smuggling operation in the 1930s, trafficking alcohol into the United States during Prohibition. In the city of Matamoros, Juan Nepomuceno Guerra, a cunning businessman, found his golden opportunity. When alcohol prohibition ended, he pivoted to smuggling narcotics, laying the foundation for what would become the Gulf Cartel. But unlike other cartels that relied on brute force, Guerra built his empire through connections. He forged deep ties with Mexican politicians, border officials, and law enforcement, turning corruption into his deadliest weapon. Guerra was untouchable. The police didn't chase him. They worked for him. But in the 1970s, a new drug took over the streets: cocaine. And with it came a new era of violence. When Guerra stepped down, he passed the throne to his nephew, Juan Garcia Abrego. And under his rule, the Gulf Cartel transformed into a cocaine powerhouse, flooding the US with drugs at an industrial scale. But power comes at a price. And soon, the cartel's greatest enemy wouldn't be law enforcement, it would be itself. Chapter 2: The Cocaine Boom and the Rise of Violence. The 1980s were the golden years of the cocaine trade. The demand for the drug in the United States skyrocketed, and the Gulf Cartel was ready to supply it. Juan Garcia Abrego, the cartel's new leader, wasn't just another gangster. He was a businessman. While other cartels fought over scraps, he struck a deal that would change the game forever. Abrego made a pact with the Cali and Medellin cartels of Colombia. The Gulf Cartel would transport Colombian cocaine into the US, using Mexico as a launch pad. But instead of demanding cash, Abrego asked for 50% of the product. This meant higher profits and complete control over distribution. With every shipment, the cartel's empire grew. The money was unstoppable. At its peak, the Gulf Cartel smuggled tons of cocaine into the US each month. Bribes kept officials silent. Any police officer who refused the money was met with bullets instead. But with great power came greater enemies. The US government declared war on the cartel. The DEA placed Juan Garcia Abrego on its most wanted list, making him the first drug lord to be officially listed by the FBI. The heat was on. And when authorities finally closed in, the cartel faced a crisis, one that would trigger the bloodiest war in its history. Chapter 3: The Fall of Abrego and The Cartel's Deadly Rebirth. By the mid-1990s, the Gulf Cartel was a billion-dollar empire. But its leader, Juan Garcia Abrego, had made one fatal mistake: he believed he was untouchable. The US government had different plans. After years of undercover work, the DEA gathered enough evidence to take him down. In 1996, Abrego was finally captured in Monterrey, Mexico. His arrest was historic. He became the first Mexican drug lord to be extradited to the United States. With their leader behind bars, the Gulf Cartel should have collapsed. Instead, it evolved into something even deadlier. Ojirel Cardenas, a former low-level enforcer, saw an opportunity. He took control of the Gulf Cartel and transformed it into something Mexico had never seen before: a military-style killing machine. Cardenas' greatest weapon? The Zetas. The Zetas were a group of ex-Mexican special forces, handpicked to serve as the cartel's personal army. They brought military discipline, advanced weaponry, and brutal tactics never seen before in the drug war. Under Cardenas' rule, the cartel didn't just smuggle drugs. They controlled cities. The Gulf Cartel had gone from a criminal empire to a full-fledged paramilitary force. And their next target? The entire country of Mexico. Chapter 4, The Zetas, from elite soldiers to Mexico's most feared killers. Imagine training some of the deadliest soldiers in the world, teaching them guerrilla warfare, advanced weapons handling, and psychological terror. Now imagine those same soldiers breaking ranks and using those skills against you. This is the story of the Zetas, the Gulf Cartel's lethal enforcers who turned into Mexico's most feared killing machine. In the late 1990s, Gulf Cartel leader Ojirel Cardenas had a vision. Instead of relying on traditional cartel hitmen, he recruited 34 ex-soldiers from Mexico's most elite military unit, Grupo Aeromovil de Fuerzas Especiales, GAEF. These weren't ordinary gunmen. They were highly trained assassins, experts in torture, ambush tactics, and urban warfare. They didn't just eliminate their enemies, they sent messages. This was the Zetas' calling card, absolute terror. Under Cardenas' command, the Zetas became the cartel's elite death squad. They crushed rival gangs, silenced informants, and even took on the Mexican government. They weren't just muscle. They were a military force. But the Zetas' power grew too fast, and that became a problem. The enforcers wanted more than just a paycheck. They wanted control. In 2010, the unthinkable happened. The Zetas broke away from the Gulf Cartel, igniting one of the bloodiest wars in Mexico's history. The Gulf Cartel had created a monster it could no longer control. Chapter 5, Cartel Civil War, Gulf vs. Zetas, a nation in chaos. In 2010, Mexico erupted into chaos. The Gulf Cartel's once loyal enforcers, the Zetas, had broken away, forming their own criminal empire. What followed was one of the deadliest cartel wars in modern history. This wasn't just a business dispute. It was personal. The streets of Mexico turned into a battlefield. This was no longer just cartel-on-cartel violence. It was urban warfare. Entire cities became war zones. Civilians were caught in the crossfire. Towns were emptied overnight as families fled for their lives. No one was safe. Not politicians. Not businessmen. Not even the police. The Gulf Cartel tried to fight back, but the Zetas had something they didn't: ruthless discipline and military strategy. To match the Zetas' brutality, the Gulf Cartel turned to new allies. They struck an alliance with the Sinaloa Cartel and the familiar Michoacana, two of Mexico's biggest drug syndicates. With their new allies, the Gulf Cartel launched a counter-offensive. Towns turned into battlegrounds. Bodies piled up. Both sides escalated their tactics. Kidnappings. Beheadings. Even military-grade assaults on entire police departments. The Mexican government could no longer ignore the war. They launched Operation Tamaulipas, sending thousands of troops to crush both the Gulf Cartel and the Zetas. Despite the government crackdown, the war raged on. The Gulf Cartel splintered into factions. The Zetas split into even deadlier groups. What started as a cartel power struggle had turned into an all-out war for control of Mexico's drug trade. The Gulf vs. Zetas war changed Mexico forever. And the bloodshed wasn't over. Chapter 6, Modern-day Gulf Cartel. Fractured but deadly, the Gulf Cartel once ruled Mexico's drug trade with an iron fist. But after years of internal wars, government crackdowns, and betrayals, the organization is no longer the unified powerhouse it once was. The once mighty cartel is now fragmented, split into rival factions, each fighting for control. But don't be fooled. A fractured Gulf Cartel is still a deadly Gulf Cartel. The cartel has adapted, evolving its operations to survive. With increased military pressure on the drug trade, they've expanded into new businesses: fuel theft, human trafficking, and extortion. In some regions, they act like a shadow government, controlling entire towns through fear, bribery, and violence. The Mexican government continues to wage war against them, deploying thousands of soldiers to cartel strongholds. But the Gulf Cartel is resilient. Every time authorities take down a leader, another one rises. Today, the Gulf Cartel is not as powerful as it once was. But they are far from finished. Their influence still spreads across Mexico and beyond, from the US to Central and South America. They are survivors, shapeshifters, and brutal strategists. And as long as there's a demand for drugs, they will always find a way to supply it. Chapter 7: The Future of the Gulf Cartel. Can it ever be stopped? The Gulf Cartel has survived wars, betrayals, and government crackdowns. It has adapted, evolved, and even fractured, but it has never disappeared. Despite military operations, US law enforcement efforts, and rival cartels closing in, the Gulf Cartel still operates across Mexico and beyond. The question remains, can it ever be stopped? The cartel's future, a never-ending cycle? The cartel's biggest advantage is its ability to regenerate. Many experts argue that eliminating one cartel only leads to splinter groups that are even more unpredictable and violent. Others believe that corruption within the Mexican government and law enforcement is the real reason why the Gulf Cartel continues to thrive. As long as there is demand for drugs in the US and other countries, cartels will find a way to supply them. Can the cartel be defeated? Law enforcement continues to fight back. But history has shown that cutting off the head of the snake doesn't kill the body, it only grows new heads. Some believe the only way to truly end cartel violence is to change the system itself, legalizing and regulating certain drugs, reducing corruption, and offering economic alternatives to those who join the cartels out of desperation. The Gulf Cartel story is far from over. It has outlived wars, presidents, and even its own founders. And as long as power, money, and fear rule the underworld, the Gulf Cartel will always find a way to survive. The end. This documentary has revealed the brutal reality of the Gulf Cartel, their origins, rise, and current power struggles. What do you think? Can the Gulf Cartel ever be stopped? Or is this a never-ending battle? Drop your thoughts in the comments below.